Hello? Michael, do we have you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Daniel, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me, Michael?
I can hear you. Yes.
Beautiful, and I can hear you.
Ah, woohoo.
Oh, we got there.
8 minutes to spare.
Nice.
The crazy thing is that you guys were the first, I think the first or the second pandemic user event I did last year,
Yep.
and obviously it failed horribly. And I must have done 25 or so since then in the year since, and I
Yep.
haven't had any problems. And then all of a sudden, again, I'm like, God damn it, what the hell?
Well, that
Anyway,
invite shouldn't be blank. I don't know why it was blank for. I mean, I checked
I
the
s-
outbox. It's blank when I sent it. So
yeah, it's weird because I saw it and I said, okay, I got the invite. It says
yeah.
MS Teams, but then you go into it and there's nothing in the body of the message. So I was like, I was looking at that. I was trying to figure that out, and then you pinged me, and I said, okay, well, let's sort this out.
Yeah, we'll sort it out. We got there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're there. The weird thing is what I had to do is I had to log out completely and then go into your link.
Oh wow.
When I tried to use your link logged in as me, it was giving me an error.
Oh.
And so then I just completely killed Teams, didn't log in at all, and then just came in with the link, and that worked.
I wonder if it's something cross-region, because I'm probably half confident you're probably hitting North American servers while we're hitting Oceania servers.
Yeah. It's very likely something like that. Although, I mean, to be fair, I have been using some Europe tendencies. But the other thing is generally what's happened is that for an event, someone will invite me into their tenancy, and then I come in as a guest, and that seems to work. That seems to work a little bit better.
Yep,
So.
I'll put that one in the bag for next time. I think that's probably a better option, to be honest.
Yeah, that seems to work pretty well. Of course, now though I look and I've been invited to like 20 different tenancies.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
and they're never named right. Like you can never figure out which one it is, because there's some, it doesn't say like the name of the event or something. It's some guy's weird consulting company or,
Yeah.
Or an opal mining company or something.
Yes. Well, Monday we're drilling.
Ah, nice. Yeah.
Yep, we're drilling Monday, so that's going to be very fun, very interesting. I mean, the first time was fantastic. Yeah. So we'll see how it pans out in the next 2 weeks. It takes 2 weeks to about drill 14 holes. It depends on rock strength and everything.
So are you going to be physically going up there, or are you just all doing?
No, okay. The father-in-law is.
Okay.
Yeah, he's up there taking care of it all.
Yeah, it's quite the drive.
Yeah, I mean, he does it in about 9 hours. So with me, the wife, and the 3 kids, it would probably be almost a 12-hour trip.
Yeah, a lot of stops.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, people say there's nowhere to stop along the way. There's nothing to see, but there is. If you've never been, then you want to see as much as you can there. I mean, even if it just is flat red dirt. Hey,
it's beautiful. It's beautiful country. Yeah, I mean, that one time when I went up there, I went up on the Udnadada track.
Yep.
And then I went up to Udnadada, and then I cut over to Kruberpidi, and then I took the fast way back to get over to Adelaide. So that was the fast way, the 9 hours, right? As opposed. But it was beautiful. I mean, I saw wildlife. I saw there was of course dingoes out there.
Yep.
I saw a flock of emus, just like a whole bunch of them. Oh, they're intimidating up close, tell you.
Oh yeah, no, they're a big bird. They're not. I mean, it's like wombats as well. People think wombats are nice and cuddly and furry creatures, but wombats are huge.
I was told by an Aussie once, and it's kind of a sad story, but he was saying something along the lines of, when you hit them with your car, they're like hitting a brick.
Oh yeah, they'll rip out all the underneath of your car, your sump, everything. They'll do, and they'll scurry off. I mean, they'll be sore, but they're a pretty solid little tank.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's like if you ever want to find an interesting set of YouTube videos, look for a moose getting hit by cars or trains, actually, because those things are so massive. So if you hit them with your car, you're totaled, right? The moose won't even feel it. It's just boom, and you're lucky to be alive. Yeah, and there's videos of them like trains hitting them and them jumping back up again.
Jeez.
They're just massive creatures. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I can get that. I mean, you see them in the photos, see them in the videos, and yeah, they're pretty solid.
They do. When you're driving in Canada, they have a warning sign that says it has a picture of a car, and then it has a picture of the moose standing next to it, and it's about twice as tall as the car, and it says photo to scale.
Oh wow!
And it's true. I mean, when they get full size, they're huge.
Yeah.
And in mating season, they're very aggressive. Like the males get extremely aggressive. So yeah, you don't want to get up and close to any moose.
Yeah.
Bad idea.
Nah, for sure. Well, what is it I seen? Was it on TV? There's a show called "Have You Been Paying Attention?" or HYBPA over here, and it was one of the questions: two motorcyclists, what Aussie bird did they get attacked by? And it was the cassowary. It come up and
yeah. When I was up, I went up. Now it's been 2 years ago, but in 2019 when I went up to Joel, we went up to not Townsville, but Cairns. We went up to Cairns.
Yep.
And then we drove north of there, and there's a park up there where the cassowary hang out, but they're very, very difficult to find. And so we attempted to find them, and we were asking around, and we never actually did find them. But yeah, they did warn us if we do find them, not to just not to go up and pet them.
Yeah. They're like one of the most aggressive birds, aggressive animals. Like they will take you out. They're horrid. I mean, we don't come across them down in SA. Don't get me wrong, but they're very dangerous, and their legs and their claws are very powerful, very muscly, and that's what they'll take you out with.
Yeah.
And they just are very unforgiving.
You hear the story on the internet about Florida man, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, there was actually a real story. Florida man was killed by a cassowary. There's some like exotic wildlife park down in Florida, and yeah, the cassowary kicked him kicked him somewhere he shouldn't be kicked, and yeah, he didn't survive. So
yeah, no, they're slashers. They'll slash with those claws. They'll just rip you open.
Nice.
Very, very scary times with those ones, but thankfully they're not down here in SA. Or if they are, they're up the top and they don't come anywhere near me.
Exactly.
That's how I like it.
Hey, should I? Let's see. Let me see if here. I'm going to do the share tray here, so I can actually present. I sure want to share. I want to make sure you can see this. I'm going to
quickly
do a desktop. Let me know if you see this. All right.
I am seeing it.
Okay, and let me know if you see the slide deck. Let me do this. That show up?
Yes, the slide deck has. Yes, beautiful.
You may recognize the people in the photo.
Oh, yeah. Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez. That's a while ago, that one. Still got there. Yep.
Yeah, that was the last time I was there to present in person. Yep. So 2017, I had to go back to the archives for that.
Yep. Yeah. It's been a while now. Let me just share my intro slide, and we'll kick off, and we'll go for it.
All right, sounds good.
All right. So hopefully everyone's now seeing that one. Give it a moment. Send live. I think I'm still seeing your slide. Let's have a look at what's going on.
I can see your slide.
Oh, you can? Oh, okay,
yeah.
Beautiful. It must have just been my other laptop. All right, so we'll kick off. Thank you, everyone, for coming to today's user group meeting. We are a week out just because of planets and alignment and things like that, but we are at the unusual time of a little bit earlier just to allow Michael some time zone and to get some decent hours sleep in during the night. For those of you who are unaware, this is the May Office 365 user group. My name is Daniel Brown. You've probably got my emails or seen my posts around about the user group. A bit of background about me. I founded the user group back in 2009, I should say. And evolved to the Office 365 user group in 2019. I present, although I haven't presented for a while, but speak and community engagements and all lovely things around SharePoint, O365 and M365 these days as well. So much more than just SharePoint from back in the day. We meet on the third Tuesday of each month, the O365 user group, generally February to November. December being the third Tuesday of the month is pretty close to Christmas, and January being pretty much the time that everyone's away on holidays at those times. So thus the February to November. We're always looking for speakers, presenters, even if it's just a 15-minute session to say this is what we've done in O365. It's really helped our business, and this is how you sort of did it and showcase it. 15 minutes doesn't have to be an hour-long session, half-hour, 45-minute sessions. Anything is always great to see to get that conversation going and have a chat around what we've been doing with O365 or M365 as a whole now. As I said, we cover business topics, sales topics, dev topics, industry topics, community topics, technology topics, pretty much anything and everything to do with O365 and bleeding more and more into M365 because the two are so connected and joined. But not limiting to, obviously we still have SharePoint on-prem, SharePoint 2019, and various other bits and pieces that do hang off the SharePoint ecosystem, such as Nintex and workflows and flow and all that. So don't feel boxed into a certain topic. We're pretty accommodating with topics. The Australian Computer Society, we're doing the 50-year thing this year. It's a peak professional ICT body in Australia, and we have a professional code. There's a whole heap of events, branch forums, and there's also a whole bunch of certifications, so like certified security professional and a whole bunch to do with the CFIA framework. If you are an ACS member, this does count as 1.5 professional hours for your skills framework, or the CFIA skills framework. It also counts towards your membership points and all that sort of stuff. And it also obviously attributes to your personal growth. For more about the Australian Computer Society, please check out www.acs.org.au, or on social media. They've been around for, as I said, 50 years, so they've got their presence there. Couple of quick announcements. Internet Explorer, for better or for worse, in my case for better, has been retired. It is dying. It should have died many years ago, but there were still a few legacy components which needed to hang around. August 17th is the day that M365/O365 will end all official support for IE11. Teams has already happened, and so has a few various other bits and pieces. So I would highly recommend get that on the plan now to upgrade to Microsoft Edge or a browser of choosing. Obviously, I'm going to recommend Microsoft Edge, as it works quite well with the ecosystem that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. But that's not saying that other browsers wouldn't either, given that Edge is based on Chrome or Chromium and things like that. So please prepare for this. As I've highlighted on the slide, there is one downfall. It depends on how you look at it, is the WebDAV or network drives for document libraries. The old method uses the WebDAV system, view files in Explorer View, and you can map drives. That doesn't seem to be carrying over with this change. The recommended course of action is, of course, OneDrive for Business, syncing libraries that way, and then interacting with those files and information through the actual OneDrive for Business folder itself. So it is something to keep in mind if you do have network drives or network shares that are being used by these users. You will need to get out there and retrain them up because the browser component which allows for that is actually through IE, and IE is dying. Office 2010 support has ended, so I don't want to see any more Office 2010s anywhere. It did finish officially in October, but obviously Office 2010 was a big hit back in the day in 2010 days. So it's definitely something to keep on the radar, be vigilant about. The authentication security models in Office 2010 are just not adequate anymore. Modern authentication plays a big role, MFA plays a big role, so definitely get this upgraded as soon as humanly possible. My recommendation obviously is M365, don't worry about the on-prem stuff, just go straight to the cloud. SharePoint 2010, as I said, not to rehash myself too much on this, but SharePoint 2010 is also dead. They did extend it to April. this year. However, now that we're in May, it is officially unsupported and it is all but dead. Get the latest patches if you are running on premise. There are a few exploits out that are in the wild, but I would highly recommend within the next couple months of putting together a migration strategy for SharePoint 2010. As I said, don't put it off. It was a massive success, but at the time it's deployed everywhere. So it is critical that we get it in because old legacy technology is a threat and a risk to the environments. M365, the roadmap, book it, check it out every so often to see what's coming in the pipeline. All the announcements that I've just made have come through that pipeline as well. So it doesn't have to be a daily thing, but certainly once a week, once a month, check it out just to stay apprised of what's coming through. Microsoft Press discount, user groups, we've got a 40% and 45% depending on digital or hard copy discount. Please use those codes. If you do, you'll get those discounts, and it will also drive Microsoft Press with saying, well, these are worthwhile to continue as the community is getting a benefit. So please feel free if you're going to be using or buying any books. We do have a number of user groups in the community, obviously Office 365, .NET, the Data and Analytics user group, formerly the SQL Server user group, Power BI, Dynamics, Azure, IT Pro, and various other special interest groups through the Australian Computer Society. The one that's up there that I do tend to mention every so often is the Curry user group. Given COVID, I don't know how that's going to work at the moment, but the user group meets up once a month, different locations to try different curry. It's a semi-non-tech event where the main thing is curry, but obviously with being the Australian Computer Society, there's a few technical people there. Thanks to our sponsors, our venue sponsor, obviously due to COVID, we're taking precautions with Microsoft, and catering we're not doing as we're over virtual. And we've got our usual LinkedIn and Facebook sites. Check them out. They're all happening. They're all there. And with that, I will hand over to a returning guest speaker who's been to Adelaide many times, and send him live. I can't see your share screen again, Michael. Sorry.
I will share it now.
Oh, yeah,
I think
sure.
I think it's because you stole it from me.
Yeah. So Michael's been to Adelaide, various SharePoint Saturdays, and has spoken at the user group many a time. And I'd like to just also thank him again for doing this presentation for us. So I'll hand over to Michael now, and it should be coming live now, I'm hoping.
Do you see the screen now?
I do. But on my other one, it's not showing it. There we go. So without much delay, I will now hand over to Michael, and thank you very much, Michael.
All right, sounds great. Well, thank you, Daniel. And yes, it's been a few years. I actually dug up an old photo of the last time I was there at, as you mentioned, what was called the Adelaide SharePoint user group. So I'm not sure if anybody who's currently watching was there. You can find yourself in the audience maybe. But in any case, virtual it will be. I know we had a little bit of a problem last year, a little Teams mix-up, but it's good to be back online, at least again virtually. I do intend on coming there again on-prem, as we say, but of course, obviously, once things have settled down a little bit with this whole global pandemic thing that's been going on for quite some time. So, so in any case, if you're not familiar with who I am, let me give you a little bit of background. I'm a consultant at a Microsoft-based partner in the San Francisco Bay Area called Convergent Computing. And we traditionally have done a lot of infrastructure and design work around things like SharePoint, SQL Server, Exchange, Active Directory, as well as the security that goes along with that. Within the past 6-7 years or so, we've been heavily involved in the cloud-based space as well too. So we've been doing migrations, Office 365, Azure, things like that, you know, as that's changed over the years, I've also had during the time I've been doing consulting, excuse me, I've had the opportunity to go travel around the world and speak at various events. In fact, that particular slide that I'm showing here is actually a Power BI that shows all the different locations I've spoken at around the world, including Adelaide, as well as it makes for bigger circles depending on the number of times I've spoken at individual locations. So 2020 was actually the first year in over 15 years that I haven't been to Australia. So it was the first time I didn't have to renew my my electronic visa. So on the bright side, I saved $25, but on the downside, I didn't get to travel to one of my favorite places. So I do again hope to come there. Maybe if not in 2021, then at least in 2022. But as you see, I've gotten around. I've actually been to. I've got some stories I could tell later, but this is not the appropriate venue. But I've been to every state and territory in Australia. And I really love traveling and exploring around your beautiful country. So that said, let's get into what it is we're talking about here. So Daniel mentioned kind of some of the transition from SharePoint into various areas. Well, personally, I've also kind of begun a bit of my transition within the past couple of years as well, too, from primarily somebody who did a lot of infrastructure and migration work to somebody who focused very, very heavily on the Microsoft security space, particularly the Microsoft cloud security space. So really, that's fundamentally one of the reasons I'm doing sessions like this nowadays, as opposed to some of the older sessions I would do around things, like SharePoint virtualization or whatever the hot SharePoint infrastructure topic was at the time. But the first part of this presentation, I'm really going to be focusing on scaring you a little bit. And it's really on trying to help you understand how the modern hacker has evolved from some guy in his underwear in his mom's basement trying to break into something to the global industry that's become the modern hacking world that's out there today. So I'll spend that first half talking about that. The second half, I'm going to be talking about ways in which you can mitigate some of those risks. So hang in there. We won't be all just gloom and doom. That's just the first half of this presentation. But what I wanted to start with is to focus on a few of these areas in which modern hackers tend to gain access into internal systems. And first I want to start with a concept called spear phishing. So you may have heard of this concept called phishing within IT, phishing with a P. Basically, that's where you are attempting to get someone to either give up their credentials or implant a bit of malware on their machine by some form of subterfuge, typically by sending them an email and saying, hey, click on this link here or open this attachment here. We've seen those kind of attacks for many, many years. Those of you who have been around for a while might remember the Melissa virus back in the 90s that was spread by an infected Excel macro. So you just double click on it and suddenly it would go out and email everybody else, everybody in your contact list, the same file. But what spear phishing is it's much more targeted. It actually goes after specific people within your organization. And those are the people that actually have access to financial information. Those are the people that have access to intellectual property. The hackers will actually go through and get a list of employees within an organization, and they do that through various social media approaches. If you think about it, every time you put your information about where you work on a tool like LinkedIn, that's something that can be harvested and used. So you can tell, for example, that this individual works in the finance department at this particular organization, or you can determine this person is executive at this particular organization. It's the same way that they'll also even go after IT admins, because you can pretty much determine the level of someone's capabilities within that organization's IT-wise based on their title. If they're a senior engineer, network engineer, you know that they probably have access to a lot of network equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So they will target those individuals, and then they'll send them targeted payloads. And these payloads aren't as easily detectable as they used to be. A lot of times they're sophisticated enough where they're using proper English without a bunch of misspellings, and you might even be getting it from somebody that you expect to be receiving communications from. So when you're really, really determined as a hacker, you'll actually go after first the people that are associated with your target and try to get them to be hacked first. And once you've hacked them, then you launch attacks from them using their email, for example, and say, hey, you know, can you look at this spreadsheet, or can you review these numbers in this file that's on your, you know, in Office 365, and it has a link. And when they click on it, it takes them to a login page that just happens to look like Office 365, but actually isn't Office 365. So these types of spear phishing attacks are generally the first way in which adversaries get inside of your organization. That's exactly, I was actually reading, since it's now been 10 years since the very famous RSA hack. I was reading about how they initially got in, because a bunch of NDAs actually expired after 10 years, so people are talking about it. And it was via spear phishing. They targeted someone within the organization, and they opened an infected Adobe payload, is what it was. So again, spear phishing, it's initially how they'll get in, and then they'll move from that system over to other systems. We'll talk a little bit more about that here. The resources these hackers have are extremely, on a degree, larger than they used to be, much larger, because what's happening is that they're now being funded by various state governments. So not to target any specific state government, because I like my ability to travel, but needless to say, there are state governments out there that will go and fund large, you know, they'll take an entire building full of cubicles and a bunch of people working 9 to 5 or longer, usually, because this is IT and nobody works just 9 to 5. But they sit there and they attempt to just hack different organizations. A lot of times these organizations may be, you know, military targets, but in other cases, they're just organizations that they feel that they can get some funding from to be able to support some of their efforts. In other cases, it's other ones where they will try to get retribution from. There's actually a very famous case, of course, of Sony Pictures being hacked for producing a video that was not very flattering to a specific regime, and then they went after and essentially leveled the IT organization to the ground. And I mean, these guys had to rebuild from scratch everything. I mean, that's how much they completely destroyed the IT infrastructure of that particular organization. So state-sponsored attacks, we're seeing this more and more often. The resources that are out there. This isn't just Matthew Broderick, you know, sitting in his parents' house attempting to dial a bunch of phone numbers and seeing which ones are modems, which, of course, if you remember from the old movie War Games, that's exactly how he hacked into the Whopper, which was the apparently the computer that controlled all the nuclear weapons. So we've moved a little bit beyond just you know, Matthew Broderick in his basement. Ransomware is another area that we see a lot of. This has become a major issue. You may have been aware, with I think it was about a week and a half ago, of a very large oil pipeline company based out of the US that was hit by a ransomware attack that basically took out their entire SCADA network. Okay, that's a major issue. But what's actually, you know, not that there's we have this level of detail, but I've worked for utilities before, and I know that those SCADA networks are supposed to not even be connected to the internet. So my guess, and this is just my own personal guess, is someone took the malware across the air gap into that environment, and once they released it into it, it was a machine with privilege. That piece of malware then just went out and put ransomware on all the systems that were in that particular network. Again, that's my guess there, because they haven't released that. Maybe 10 years from now we'll know. But ransomware, what it specifically does is it's a algorithm that goes through and encrypts the files on a machine, and then the basically reboots the machine, puts it into a state where it says, hey, this file has been encrypted. If you want to decrypt it, you have to pay a ransom in some form of cryptocurrency like a Bitcoin or Monero. And then if you don't pay, you won't get access to the key. And the only way that you can get back to your files is by recovering from backups. And hopefully everybody's been backing up, right? That's not always the case. In fact, in the case of the example I was given, that I was told that they actually paid the ransom, and of course, after they paid the $4.4 million ransom, I think it was, the decryption algorithm was actually operating way too slow for them, so they still had to recover most of the files from backup. So keep that in mind. Just because you pay the ransom doesn't mean you're necessarily going to even be able to decrypt your files in the amount of time you would need to recover your business. But we see ransomware attacks affecting not just companies like that, but small organizations. There were some city governments in Texas that were completely taken out. The police were walking around with pads of paper writing tickets because they couldn't use the automated system that they used to have before that. The entire structure of their city government in those cases shut down. You couldn't go in and do record searches or anything like that. So ransomware is becoming a huge industry for hackers because it's profitable, because they can make money off of it, and it's just becoming a prolific way for hackers to take advantage of you. Device theft, this has always been an issue, but what I've seen recently is the sophistication in the device theft area has actually gotten much better than it used to be. One of the things the thieves, at least here in the San Francisco Bay Area, have started to do is, well, let me back it up a bit and say, within the past 20 years, anybody that lives in the Bay Area knows you don't put a laptop in the backseat of your car and leave it there, even if the car's locked, because someone's just going to break a window and steal it. It makes sense. At least it makes sense when you live in an urban area like this, because there are people that just, they're crimes of opportunity. They go ahead and take it and they resell your laptop somewhere. But what they're doing now actually is they actually have they'll walk through parking lots with Bluetooth detectors that sense when there's a Bluetooth signal coming out of the what you guys would call the boot of the car. It's called the trunk of the car. And that once they sense that, they still break the window, pop the boot, take it out of there, and you're left without a laptop. So the level of sophistication has gotten much more sophisticated. And of course, when you lose a device like that, if it's not encrypted, you have a lot of requirements, and I'm pretty sure it's the same way in Australia. But you basically need to, by law, reach out to everybody whose data has been lost. Let's say you have an offline copy of some client information. You have to reach out to them and let them know that that information has been stolen or lost. And in some cases, pay for the price of services that will protect their credit history or things, things along those lines. So it could be very expensive if you lose non-encrypted devices. You may think that you trust everybody that works within your organization. And a lot of times people tell me that. They're like, I don't need to worry about someone stealing files from my environment. But honestly, if you do the math, it's somewhere around 95% of all the cases of intellectual property lost is not actually due to theft. It's due to what you would colloquially refer to as oversharing. So that's where someone will go and make a link to some file somewhere, and of course that link, to because you want to share it with somebody in the outside, the link doesn't require any authentication to get into it, and the link accidentally goes to the wrong people. It gets forwarded. There's an email chain that gets outside of the organization, and next thing you know, there are people that shouldn't have access to that data that suddenly do have access to that data, or you're sharing some kind of client database in AWS, which actually happened to a vendor of the California Department of Motor Vehicles. They shared a bunch of information, including driver's license numbers and personal identifiable information, PID, and that was just on a publicly accessible AWS instance. And suddenly a reporter kind of pointed it out to them, but by that point, it was too late. Nobody knew exactly who had accessed that data. While all this stuff is going on, we're living in the 1990s when it comes to our password best practices. And this is one of the things that's really interesting to me, is that as far as we've gotten with a lot of the technology that's out there, we still, even as IT admins, are doing our passwords very, very poorly. Okay? One of the things that we're doing, which is actually counterproductive, is we're forcing the users to change their passwords on a very regular basis. I've seen organizations that force their users to change their password every 30 days. 60 days is common, 90 days is probably the most common. But the reality is that when you force someone to change their password that often, they're going to fall back on poor password practices because they will forget those passwords. And one of the reasons for that is that human beings are actually really bad at remembering long strings of random numbers and characters, which is what we've been telling people to change their passwords to. So when humans are bad at doing that, one of the things people don't realize is that humans are actually really good at remembering long sequences of words, or what you would call a passphrase as opposed to a password. So it's one of the things I recommend is that you actually use passphrases instead of passwords. So you can remember a mnemonic series of events like yellow, birdseed, hat, pumpkin, and that still creates an incredibly long password, but it's one that you can remember, and you don't have to necessarily change it that often. At the same time, the most important and the most critical thing, it is important for your password more than anything else, more than even the length, more than the complexity. It's important that it's unique. And it's important that it's unique, not just to you, but for everybody in the entire world, globally unique. And the reason for that is because there are these what are called dark web databases of hacked passwords that are out there. And basically, that's where hackers go turn to attempt to break into things. So currently some of the biggest databases have around 744 million passwords in there, and those are all unique passwords, and those are not duplicates. Every bad password you could possibly think of is there. Now, by the way, there's a white hat hacker site called haveitbeenpwned.com. That's actually run by an Aussie guy, and that's a great way to, number one, see if your email address has been associated with any hacks, first off, and secondly, test your password to see if it's been in these in one of these databases. I don't generally recommend you enter your password into anything outside of your corporate system, of course, but as a test, you may want to test some of your older passwords just to see if those are out there. And by the way, if you've ever had your someone in your family, let's call it your uncle, call you up and say, I think I've been hacked. Someone sent me an email and it's got my password in the subject line of the email. That's where they get it from. They get it from dark web databases. It's not that they've really been hacked. It's just that their password actually showed up in a dark web database at some point. Now, one of the reasons why this is extremely dangerous in the corporate world is because people reuse passwords across services, and they do it all the time. So what ends up happening is that they will, in the past, actually, within the last couple of years, we've been trying to get people away from this, but they will use their corporate password as the same as their Facebook password, for example, or any of these other personal passwords. A lot of times, though, people, we've gotten them out of that mostly. We've told the users, don't do that, please don't do that. But what still happens is that they use their corporate password for other corporate services that they have to log into. So your corporate services tell you, hey, we need you to log into this paycheck platform, or to log into this whatever service that we're using that's a partner of ours. But we're not tied into it from an identity perspective, so you need to create an account there. The account is almost always the email address, and it's almost always the same password that person uses for corporate, because they think, well, you know what, I'm using this for work, this isn't my Facebook password. Well, guess what? Those guys get hacked. And the first thing the dark web hackers go do, and they find that in the database, within minutes of that happening, is they attempt to log into Office 365. They attempt to log into different services with those hacked credentials. And a lot of times they'll get in if you don't have things like multi-factor in place, which we'll talk about here. Cache credentials. I've talked to a lot of different people that work for companies that run penetration tests. And invariably, they tell me that the vast majority of the time, the way that they get in to systems, the way that they find and penetrate these systems is via cache credentials. Cache credentials on various systems, but specifically cache credentials on Windows can be extremely dangerous. And let me give you a scenario why. And this is a very common scenario you've probably seen unfold. And basically, it's a scenario where I have a end user's laptop, and let's pick on a user. Let's just call him John. So John brings his laptop over to the help desk, and the service desk, the help desk, they go and they fix something on that machine, but they need to log in using a privileged account. So they log in with a privileged account, they fix it, they hand the laptop back to John. John goes on his merry way. Well, on John's laptop are cache credentials, not just of John's password, but also of that admin's password. Why? Because Windows by default will cache passwords to allow you to do things like log in on an airplane when you don't have connection back to your directory. So those cache credentials sit in there in what's called the LSASS store. Now, if someone is able to successfully, let's say, spearfish John and compromise his machine by putting a piece of malware on that machine, what those hackers generally first do then is they attempt to open up the LSASS store and first run a dictionary attack against all 744 million dark web databases that we talked about, which, by the way, on the average laptop takes less than 10 seconds to run. And then if that doesn't work, and it usually does, or at least half the time it does, if that doesn't work, they will attempt to then brute force those passwords. So if the admin didn't have a very long password, then eventually, after enough time of John wondering why his machine is so slow because it's sitting there running brute force attacks, they will get those credentials, and then they'll be able to log in not as John anymore, but as somebody who's privileged. And God forbid that's like a domain admin or somebody else within the domain, because then once they move over to another system, they can then spread ransomware everywhere. They can level it to the ground. They get in. They move laterally from system to system. Again, read about the RSA hack. It'll tell you kind of exactly how this stuff is happening. By the way, that was 10 years ago. That was a government, a state-sponsored attack as well too. But they moved laterally between that one machine where the Adobe attack started first on. They moved over to another machine. They were able to get credentials off of that. They moved over to a third machine. They were able to get domain admin credentials off to that, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually they found their way across the air gap and stole the RSA seed keys, which was pretty hard to do. Let's put it that way. I talked about lateral attacks here. The idea with the lateral attack is, again, I'm trying to move to systems that have the real power. In fact, actually, most hackers will do this stealthily. It took, they found out later on, for example, hackers were inside Sony Pictures for 2 weeks before they finally released the bombs that took everything out within that organization. But the other thing is that once they move around, they also leave back doors all over the place. They do things like create golden tickets. So in your domain admin, there's this crazy concept called a golden Kerberos ticket, where I can create a ticket which is non-expiring. And then even if the organization is able to take back control over the account that created the ticket is still out there. The hacker has access to that ticket, and they use it to gain access to resources. So that's one example of a lateral attack. You're moving from system to system. So, okay, what do we do about all this? This kind of thing is happening right underneath our noses. You may or may not even be affected by it, and if you haven't, knock on wood, it may happen at any time, right? You need to be prepared for this kind of stuff, because once it does, it's a CV generating event. Let's put it that way. The idea is, first off, when you're designing your architecture, you may have seen this concept called defense in depth, or DID. The idea of the defense in depth is that we don't just have one layer that a hacker has to get through. Your data itself is protected by multiple layers. It's got physical, you have to get through past building security, for example. Network layer, you can't just plug into your network because your network is secured by certificates, for example. Or you've got different ACLs between different network segments that are protecting your data. Host level security, firewalls, etc. Application level security within the app itself, preventing certain things, maybe even DLP policies, which we'll talk about. Administration, controlling who has access to the data itself, making sure that you have admin controls in place. All of those then are like those peels of the onion that the hacker would have to get through before they actually get to the data itself. So design around DID, that's an important concept. And I mentioned this under the passwords, but try to get your users used to the concept of using passphrases. And as admins, I know, again, this sounds counterintuitive, but don't have your users change their password that often. If you do, all they're going to do is just sequence numbers at the end of every password. It's the same password with a different number at the end. I promise you that happens all the time. Or worse, I'll tell you what the most common password is right now, at least in North America where it's spring, but it's called Spring 2021 with a capital S is actually one of the most common passwords right now, because every 3 months, every 90 days, people change their passwords. So they just change it to whatever the season is. It's ridiculous, but it happens way, way, way too often. So at the same time, I also encourage, even if you, on a personal level, there's password management tools that you can use that will remember these cryptic passwords for you, so you don't have to worry about them. You can still use passphrases on the ones that for example, the main ones to get into services, or the one to get into your password manager, for example. But also as a from a corporation perspective, there are tools that you can help to deploy that will manage all of your passwords and will provide for the ability to share those passwords between different admins and things like that. And then, of course, never reuse a password. Never, ever reuse any password across any service. Always use globally unique passwords, because that protects you in the case that something gets hacked. And that's where those password management tools can come into play, because they can just create those 16-character cryptic passwords that you're never going to have to remember. You just have to remember your password manager password to get in. It may seem, straightforward, but it's surprising how often this still happens today. Make sure you're checking where the hyperlinks are actually going to before you click on things. And honestly, in most cases, for example, personally, I've gotten so paranoid now, I just don't even click on any link that's in an email. If I'm expecting something from my bank, for example, and I get an email from them, I see the email, I open up a fresh web browser, and I go straight to the bank and I log in, and if I see if that's also within the bank, not just within the bank, but within any service as well too. But if you are expecting it, you're pretty sure that it's real, hover over the link to make sure that the link is not taking you somewhere. When I was putting the slide deck together, I very easily dug this particular one out of my junk folder and just to use it for the screenshot here. But that's an actual hacking link that's in place. And by the way, these hackers get really sophisticated. I tracked one down one day, which was kind of interesting. It was a customer of mine, and the managing director, the big shot at the organization, had gotten an email, and the email itself had went back to a specific link, and we wanted to make sure that link wasn't one that was going to be capturing the data and all that. Not that they had clicked on it or anything, but it was just due diligence, what have you. So, because seeing who's actually targeting this person. So we created a isolated session, actually clicked on the link, and it took to a page that was actually for hacking tools. It said, your hacking tools haven't been paid for yet. To pay for it, send Bitcoin to this address, blah, blah, blah. So in that case, the hacker had gone to all this effort of sending the email with the targeted link, had everything set up, but actually didn't pay for his hacking tools. So even if they had clicked on it, it wouldn't have worked. But that was one step away from, once the tools are paid for, all of a sudden, everything looks very, very official. It looks like a real login screen. It looks like something you might expect. And unfortunately, with cloud services today, users have gotten way too used to being prompted for credentials, and that actually creates its own problems. And that's something I don't think we have time to discuss. But there's a whole area around design to make sure that you're only authenticating for a very small number of times, and then you're reusing those tokens across services, so you don't have to keep on authenticating. Again, it sounds counterintuitive, but it's actually less secure to keep forcing authentication at somebody. I had these discussions with clients sometimes. They go, we want our tokens to time out after 30 minutes. And I said, well, why? If you have MFA in place, if you have this, you want your tokens to last much longer, so that you're not constantly prompting your users for authentication. Because when the hackers prompt them with bad authentication, they're just going to blindly enter in their credentials because they get prompted all the time. Physical security. This is an important one. Maybe not so much in the pandemic when people aren't going into offices as often, but even from the perspective, the whole work from home thing has created its own challenges around physical security, mainly around people losing laptops and getting stolen, or someone breaking into their house and stealing things. But from a corporation perspective, the physical security is actually an important part. Talking to these penetration test people, they also mention another way in which they get in very easily is by tailgating into the physical facilities and then dropping USB keys all over the place, next to a printer, next to a phone somewhere, on someone's desk. And invariably what happens is people go, oh, look, free USB key. and plug it into their laptop, and the malware gets transferred onto their laptop that way. So make sure you initiate no tailgating policies, which, by the way, they have these kind of subway style, turnstile gate type things that as people walk through with they can badge in, and it'll tell if there's more than one person. If it does, it actually drops these gates up or notifies security, for example. So those are kind of more sophisticated ways of ensuring that you're not tailgating. Full disk encryption, I kind of alluded to this one earlier, but basically use it on all your devices. Things like BitLocker. There's Mac encryption as well too. iOS, Android devices, they all have full disk encryption. Absolutely enable this in place. Make sure you have mobile device management that allows you to wipe systems remotely as well too, if they've been compromised, or after a certain number of failed logins as well too. And that'll help to protect you again against those situations where you would have to notify somebody. In fact, most of those regulations will state that if the data that was lost was encrypted, you don't need to notify the people that their information was stolen, because in theory, nobody can gain access to that. DLP policies. This is the idea of restricting what's happening to content after it's been accessed. And you talked about all those. We remember the DID concept, the admin layer. We've gotten very good at the admin perspective of restricting who has access to what type of content, but we're not very good at controlling what happens to that after the case. Think like the Edward Snowden type of situation. SharePoint admin who has rights to gain into data, but should not be taking that data outside of that system and moving it somewhere else, which is kind of what happened here. So this is where DLP policies can be useful tools to restrict what happens to that content, to disallow it from being just bulk exported out.
Just to chime in on that note, yes, Edward Snowden was a SharePoint administrator. Not a well-known fact, but it's something that, yes, is certainly there. He was a SharePoint admin.
Yes, the SharePoint claim to Snowden's fame. Yes, he was a SharePoint admin. Yeah, I'm not making this stuff up, man. That's absolutely true. So yes, DLP would have helped save a lot of headaches for the Department of Defense in Snowden's case, but that ship has sailed, I guess. MFA. I alluded to this earlier, and if there's one thing you take out of this session, hopefully it's enable MFA within your organization and do it today. If not, okay, tomorrow at the latest. Enable it, and enable it for every user if you absolutely positively can. I know there have to be some exceptions in certain cases, some kind of accounts and what have you, but those exceptions are always the ones that people hack into. And MFA is ridiculously useful in stopping these types of attacks. Why? Because if John has gotten his credentials out there in some hacked website and it gets into the dark web databases and they log in as username and password of John, they still need the multi-factor authentication credentials, the third factor for John to be able to get in as that particular user. So this is where MFA is extremely valuable. And there's varying levels of MFA. Some people don't realize that, but SMS text, for example, while it's much better than nothing at all, is actually the least secure option because of something called SIM swapping. And SIM swapping is basically where I harvest this person's username and password and I get ready to use it, but then I call up the telephone company, the mobile phone company, and I say, hey, I'm this user, and I've got a new phone with a new SIM on it. Can you help me switch over to it? And it's ridiculously easy how to do that. Even recently, there have been cases of this. They've gotten a little bit better about it, but they will switch it over to the new SIM card, and then immediately they log in with username and password. It sends the SIM text MFA code to that hacker's phone, and next thing you know, that person's crypto wallet just got emptied, or they logged in, or whatever it is. That's actually a real case of where some guy lost, I forget how many millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin because he got SIM swapped. basically. But you can use biometrics as well too, as well as authenticator apps, which you can download on your phone today. Microsoft has one called Microsoft Authenticator, which of course is basically the same thing as Google Authenticator. The next level up beyond that is like a hardware key approach. That's actually what Microsoft uses to log in. If you're a Microsoft employee, you use a hardware key to log into your device, in addition to, of course, username and password, and biometrics as well. So what about in the Microsoft space? What are the kind of tools Microsoft has? I put the various Microsoft security tools into these various categories. That are what's called the National Institute of Security and Technology's US-based organization. It's what's their cybersecurity framework. And so the cybersecurity framework is about, identifying who somebody is, protecting your resources, detecting when there's attacks going on, responding to those attacks, and then recovering from them. Now, this should really be a Venn diagram because there's some overlap in between these various areas. So, forgive me if I do understand some of these tools work in multiple areas, but I try to fit them into basically into the areas in which they best fit. And we'll take a look briefly at a bunch of these different tools, and we'll quickly demo one of them here, and that's actually this one. One of my favorite modern tools from Microsoft. It's what's called a CASB, or Cloud Access Security Broker. And in true Microsoft fashion, of course, Microsoft has given its own acronym called MCAS, or Microsoft Cloud App Security. This is a phenomenally good tool to give you an understanding of what's going on within your organization, within your various cloud applications that are out there. So it tells you, hey, this user just uploaded 300 gigabytes to Dropbox, or someone just publicly shared confidential files on OneDrive, or I just got notified that this particular cloud provider just got hacked and all of the username and passwords of users were released onto the dark web database, and we noticed that these 10 users have email addresses that are from your organization. And those are actually real examples of the types of things and alerts that you get out of cloud app security. So again, we'll quickly demo it. I've got a demo environment of MCAS running here. Microsoft has completely renamed a bunch of the tools that they have within the cloud security space. They're now kind of all fit under the Defender title. This is again in true Microsoft fashion. We go through lots of different name changes. There's one particular application I think that's had 7 different acronym changes within the past 20 years. I mean, it's an old application, but that's actually FIM. So. But in this case, Microsoft 365 Defender, there's various tools within it. We'll take a look at MDE, Defender for Office 365, and then MDI, which is another great tool. Azure Defender within the Azure space, if you have Azure properties like Azure Systems, there's Azure Defender for Servers, Azure Defender for IoT, and then Azure Defender for SQL. So if you have different SQL instances, database instances in Azure, that'll do things like tell you if there's a SQL injection attack going on against your SQL databases, for example. MDI. Okay, so probably my second favorite Microsoft security tool nowadays. MDI is kind of an on-prem equivalent to MCAS, but they're actually combined now into the same admin console. When they first came out, they had their own admin consoles, but then Microsoft merged the consoles together, which is actually great because you get kind of a single pane of glass look at at like a user and their cloud-based activities that they're doing in MCAS, as well as the on-prem stuff that's going on as well too, the on-prem logins and things like that. And it works, by the way, by deploying agents on, or what they call sensors, on your domain controllers. You need a sensor, by the way, in every domain controller within your domain, otherwise you have a blind spot. But then what it does is it will look for activity that's associated with malicious attacks. It'll look for golden ticket attacks. It'll look for DC sync attacks, things like that. And then it'll send them up into your MCAS alerting console and tell you, that this kind of stuff is going on. Another fantastic tool. I've been using this quite a bit at some various clients here. It's what's called a SIEM, or Security Information Event Management Platform. This is phenomenally powerful, and it's called Azure Sentinel. Azure Sentinel is a Azure Logs Analytics workspace. And the idea of a seam is that you take logs from a bunch of different security sources and you put them all into one location. And then you use different heuristics to be able to do things like tell that something is weird about the traffic, or there's potentially an attack going on, or some other kind of vector. And so when in the organizations where you set this up, where the firewall logs are all coming into it, the domain controllers are all sending their logs locally, they're even sending audit logs from file servers, what have you. You can then go back and forensically look at the past up to 2 years worth of data and be able to tell a story about what's going on. To give you another example how useful this is, when Microsoft came out with that Exchange patch about a month ago now for the incredibly damaging OWA attack, which was out there, many of you guys may have been aware of that, Microsoft came out with the patches for this 3 days after people were already attacking, which is very rare that this happens. And what was interesting is the same day they came out with the patches, they actually came out with these Azure Sentinel definitions, which would tell you, going back to the past 30 days or even longer, if you're storing it longer, if there were certain activities that were that looked like the types of activities that would be associated with those attacks. So different types of URL strings being passed to your OWA server and what have you. So that would at least give you peace of mind knowing that, hey, it doesn't look like I was attacked. Of course, by the way, this only affected on-prem OWA, which is all the more reason to get your stuff into Office 365. Or if you really do need on-prem, put app proxy in front of OWA, because that with the clients that we had with app proxy were also protected against that particular attack. But in any case, from a Azure Sentinel perspective, that's where something like Sentinel was extremely valuable. It actually took the firewall vendors at least a day after that to come out with their own version of the same type of thing. Microsoft has a tool to help in the password space as well too. A lot of people don't realize this because this space has been pretty heavily third-party over the years, but their tool is called Azure AD Password Protection. It operates also as agents that run on your domain controllers, but basically it extends the password filter DLL to restrict what it is that users can do when they're changing passwords. So you can restrict them from using any part of their name in the password. You can restrict them from using specific keywords like the name of your company, or you can actually have it check the dark web databases and make sure that the password that they're entering is not part of one of those databases. Microsoft has a whole space of tools called entitlement management, which is kind of a funny term if you think about it, but the idea of entitlement management is that instead of giving a vendor full global admin rights within Azure, you give them a very targeted specific set of rights which expires after a specific period of time and has to go through an approval workflow. And one of the components of entitlement management is this component called PIM, or privileged identity management. The idea with privileged identity management is I don't want people to be permanent global admins. In fact, you only have 1 or 2 bright glass accounts which are permanent global admins. Everybody else has to go through that workflow process to make sure that they really do need to do the global admin work, and you can have that as part of a workflow that says, okay, you need to have this CR, you need to get approval from this manager, and that way, if someone does hack an admin in the middle of the night, that doesn't necessarily give them the keys to the kingdom to go through and damage a bunch of Azure properties. Microsoft actually has an on-prem version of this called Microsoft Identity Manager, which, by the way, was, I talked about FIM. Sorry, it's actually MIM now. The idea of it is, the tool itself is called Privileged Access Management, PAM, which runs on top of MIM. Confusing enough. But the idea of PAM is you have a SharePoint-based application which allows someone to request, for example, domain admin, and then after it goes through the workflow process, it automatically adds that user count into the domain admin group. Now, it's a bit overkill for a lot of organizations to deploy something like PAM on top of MIM, but the concept that I do want to get you familiar with is this concept of the bastion forest, because I personally believe that this is going to become the de facto standard in designing directories in the future. The idea being is that all of your privileged accounts, any domain admin account, any type of special IT privileges, all reside as accounts in the bastion forest, and then those accounts across a one-way trust are added into the groups in which they need the rights to. So they're added in as into the domain into the domain admin groups, for example, or into other groups where they then can do specific types of tasks within the corporate environment. So that's kind of the concept. Again, I think this is something that'll play out over the next couple of years. Azure Information Protection. This relates to the DLP that I talked about. Microsoft has services within Azure like Azure RMS that will restrict copy and pasting content, restrict printing content, restrict programmatically accessing the content, and essentially, slow down your Snowden type scenarios that we talked about. Okay, I want to have a couple minutes here to show you, briefly show you Cloud App Security, get an idea of what it is that this kind of tool can do. And again, this is a demo environment, so keep in mind it's not going to have a lot of rich data that's within it. And I think it's decided to go haywire on me. I was just decided to log in again because I've taken too long. There we go. So now we're going to go into the dashboard. The idea with this is that, I can get a lot of information about an individual user, what it is that they're doing. This is me, I'm logging as the admin, but I can actually see the activity, where it is that they're logging from. This is my IP address in San Francisco. I can also see what other types of activities that this user did at a specific point. Was doing some stuff in SharePoint. I can see when the logins were. I can go in and take a look at other types of alerts. We can see someone publicly shared some confidential files and they shouldn't have been. Someone was logging in from infrequent countries. In this case, I think this was actually the US because, again, this is a demo environment, so it views it as infrequent right now, even though nobody's really logging in. But again, you can kind of get an idea of, here we go, this is a useful dashboard. This one is showing all the different traffic that's out there. I can see what kind of traffic is coming from higher risk applications. I can see who's doing the most kind of traffic. I can see what applications are doing. I can see where the headquarters from the different applications are. Let's take a look at some of this high risk traffic. See, you can see Microsoft has basically gone through and categorized these various tools that are out there based on different factors and basically given them a grade of 1 through 10. And so you can see in this case there's definitely some activity that's out there that's maybe using systems that I don't necessarily want my end users to be using, but then you can track down which users were using that platform, what IP addresses they were coming from. I guess there's nothing under the users there, but okay. Well, this one's maybe the bad example, but the idea, let's see if we can find any active users here. Okay, Microsoft's, well, this is something. Okay, this is normally what it's supposed to show you, the total traffic. For whatever reason, it shows up here, but then it doesn't show up in the other one. Blame it on the demo environment. Again, if you have a real environment here, you can have a lot more rich contextual information here. But again, this is, in a normal environment, this is, you'll see things will pop up and say, hey, this user just logged in from Serbia. Is that expected? And it turns out, no, it's not expected. It's the credentials were lost, and then you can immediately go in and when you've investigated a user, you can actually lock them down. So you can actually say, I want to go into this particular user and I want to suspend them, or I want to require them to sign in all over again. Ask them to change the password, and this will sign them out of all of their Office 365 tokens. Or confirm their compromise, lock down the account, that kind of thing. And by the way, you can obfuscate the actual users, so you don't actually see the names of the users. That's useful in places with additional privacy restrictions around the IT admins, snooping around and seeing what it is that people are doing, because obviously this can be a very powerful tool, which in the wrong hands can be used for evil as well as good. All right, I'm going to take us back to this slide because I believe I am out of time, but I don't know if there are any questions. If I don't get a chance to answer a question, though, I want to make sure you have an opportunity to connect with me on LinkedIn, different various properties that are out there, what have you. But I also want to thank everybody for their time today. So are there any questions?
If anyone's got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or use the Q&A. I turned it on. I did. Checking the Q&A now. We've got spinning circle. What have we got?
Yeah, I'm getting the spinning circle too. Maybe Microsoft unplugged one of the Azure data centers. I don't know.
Sorry, I was just checking if there's any questions, and no, Sharon commenting that I've lost weight since the photo, so that's cool.
Yeah, I do want to point out I'm not making that photo public since I surreptitiously took it back in 2017, and I pulled that one out and I said, I bet you a few people are still here that we're in that photo.
Yeah.
But yeah. I'm not uploading this version of the slide deck. If you actually do want the slide deck on SlideShare, I've got there's one from Microsoft 365 Philly, which I did last week, which is almost identical to this. So just download that version that doesn't have all of your pretty faces there.
No problem. I don't think we've got any questions offhand. Is there any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or use the Q&A feature of Teams. If you're not sure how to use the Q&A feature, up the top there's a little talking bubble with a question, and click on that and it will show it. But yes, there's not many people know about the Edward Snowden SharePoint admin thing. Yeah.
He just, I mean, yeah, he was a SharePoint admin. Yep. He was the SharePoint admin, as I understand there. But
nice.
There you go.
I think we're good for questions at the moment. I think everyone's content at the moment. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to Michael, varying via his properties, and Michael will definitely get in contact. I mean, he's pretty approachable, very easy to chat to, and we'll more than happy answer any questions you got.
Absolutely. I may wait until tomorrow morning to answer them, so don't expect an immediate response.
Yeah, fair enough. No, that's fair enough.
It is just past 11 now, my time, so.
Yeah. No, we do appreciate taking the time, Michael. It's great to have you back at the group and to have you present again, and hopefully one day we'll see you in person again after all this COVID stuff.
I'm hoping for May 2022. That's what I'll shoot for. I think that's a good time to head out there and go up to your opal mine or something.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, cheers. Definitely, again, thank you everybody for your time. I know time is valuable, so I certainly appreciate you listening in today. And again, reach out to me and hope to see you all again in person. And thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for that. So yes, thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone who attended this afternoon session. Apologies, it is a little bit earlier than usual. It's just that we want to make Michael not as tired tomorrow morning. So we do appreciate everyone's time and effort who has come along this afternoon. Yet again, if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to Michael or myself, and I can certainly get Michael to answer them for you. Our next user group meeting on that note is on Tuesday the 15th of next month. I haven't got a speaker yet, so I'll be looking to lock one in. I've got a maybe, so stay tuned in the next few days to see if I'll have that locked in. Other than that, have a great day and a great weekend, and thank you very much again for attending. And thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Cheers. Let's see if there's any last minute questions or queries. No. That's just one thing I did want to point out as well, sorry. Yeah, cool. Oh no, they don't need to. Yep, that's cool.